Like to start? Thank you. So welcome to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Town Hall on supporting early career academics. This event is sponsored by the Community Engagement Frontiers Topical Group on Diversity and Inclusion and the Snowmass Early Career Core Initiatives. So in this event, we'll use the term academia to include scientific research roles at colleges, universities, national labs, and federal agencies. This panel will discuss the challenges of early career scientists often encounter and how to overcome them, and which systems need to be updated to improve inclusivity in recruiting and retention. This event responds to some of the data that was collected as part of the Snowmass Early Career Climate Survey that was distributed a few months ago. So my name is Tiffany Lewis. I'll be the moderator for today's event. I'm a NASA postdoctoral fellow at Goddard Space Flight Center. And when I'm not advocating for diversity and inclusion, I study particle energetics in the jets of active galaxies. I'd also like to acknowledge our Zoom host, Amber Ropey, who is a graduate research assistant at the University of Oklahoma. Amber is a member of the DPF Ethics Committee and studies exotic decays of the Higgs boson in the search for long-lived particles and dark matter. Today, we are also joined by 4 esteemed panelists, which I will introduce. So Zoya Valari received her PhD from Stony Brook University in high energy experimental physics. She's currently a postdoctoral associate at Caltech studying neutrino oscillations with NOVA and DUNE. Zoya has been an advocate for gender-based inclusion in physics since her grad school years, where she was president of the Graduate Women in Science and Engineering Club. Faramunji received her PhD from the University of Washington and is currently an assistant professor of physics at the University of Oklahoma. Farah has some of the highest resolution simulations of some of the smallest and dimmest galaxies, probing the nature of dark matter. In the midst of this cutting-edge research program, she finds time to advocate for diversity in K-12 and undergraduate STEM programs through white papers, REUs, and outreach. Midhat Farouk received her PhD in physics from the University of Michigan, where she studied muon G-2 and founded the Physics Graduate Council, served on the executive board of the Society for Women in Physics, and organized panels at multiple institutions to advocate for diversity and inclusion. She's currently a careers program manager at APS, where she manages career programs that provide resources and professional development for students and early career scientists. Patricia Boyd received her PhD in physics and atmospheric science from Drexel University. Currently, Patty is the lab chief of the Exoplanets and Stellar Astrophysics Laboratory and the project scientist for TESS, the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite. She was also recently involved in a working group that developed the hiring and promotion practices, review, and recommendations for equity, diversity, and inclusion in the Astrophysics Science Division at Goddard Space Flight Center. So today we're going to cover 3 broad topics that boil down to access, assessment, and advocacy. I will read each prompt and then the panelists are going to share their thoughts, and then we'll open the floor for questions from the audience. So feel free to submit your comments and questions at any time and to raise your hand during each Q&A. We will close today's event with a broad Q&A, so if you have any remaining questions or comments, anonymous questions may be submitted through the Google form linked in the chat at any time. And I did want to ask before we get started if any of the panelists would like to say a few words before we get started. Okay. So moving on to our first topic, access to academic career paths. So we have a little story here on the side. When I was in grad school, I fell in with a group of young people who had grown up together, and every Thursday night we played card and board games. I didn't want to make everyone stop and explain the new set of rules each week, so I usually just tried to learn the rules as we played through observation. One favorite was essentially Uno, where there were occasional bursts of players tossing cards into the pile furiously. And whenever I tried to participate, I would have cards handed back to me politely because they assumed that I had just made a mistake in the heat of the game. No one realized I didn't know the game, and eventually I felt like I'd gone on too long to ask any questions. So they just thought I wasn't particularly good at it. I never minded not winning because I was just happy to be there. And while this approach may be fine for spending time with friends, it's not a great approach to a career. So the questions that we have come up with in response to the climate survey are: what types of sacrifices must early career people make to fit into the academic lifestyle? How does the structure and culture of the academic career path result in inaccessibility for different groups? And what socioeconomic issues may prevent retention in academia? And finally, a big portion of this is what resources could be provided and structural changes could be made to make the academic career path more accessible. So with that, I will hand it off to our panelists.
I'm happy to start speaking. I was just looking at video clues from other panelists. Okay, I think first thing that I want to say before I start speaking on any of these topics is all of my views and opinions are informed by work that is done by primarily Black scientists in academia. And I am very influenced and follow the work of Dr. Chanda Prescott-Weinstein, and I will drop the links of those work here. So just giving credit to all of the hard work and organizing that's actually being done. Having said that, just starting, I think listing the types of sacrifices early career people make, I'm sure there is a bunch to list. And in one short word, I want to encapsulate that as community. We move a lot, we go to different places, and our community changes. And depending on what socioeconomic status you are, or what is your cultural heritage, community means different things, and we lose our community when we go around. And that's a big loss, both in terms of resources and emotional health. I made a list of resources that can be provided and structural change. And again, this is inspired by the AIP Team Up report that was again written primarily for Black physicists. But I think it applies to a lot of other underserved communities in academia. So I'm just going to go through the list. One big thing is pay for relocation. Just pay for relocation. There is no excuses at this point. Something very related to relocation is visa fees reimbursement. Most of the academic institutions don't have a way to pay back for visa fees. So just figure out a way. These things should have been done at least 10 years ago, but they're not. Conference, hotel, and travel upfront. Like, again, as you can see, a lot of these things would require a list that I'm saying require resources, specifically in terms of money and then time. But unfortunately, care work does require those resources. So I'm going to go ahead and list them. Fourth is something that Caltech students, and again, Black students, have been fighting for: robust healthcare with dental, vision, and therapy coverage. No excuses. Like, these are the resources, basic resources. Healthcare is required for all humans and specifically for academics. Affordable housing, again, these sounds like these could apply to our larger community, and they do apply to grad students. Grad students should not be paying 50% of their income in housing. So just affordable housing, free recreation center and gym. I know when we talk about the support and people ask that, oh, grad students should be, we should do more exercise, we should keep ourselves healthy. Where are the resources? Where are the structural changes? No excuses that especially on-campus gyms are not available for free. On-campus childcare and nursing rooms, parental leave, all gender restrooms. I'm sorry, these lists literally came to me in like a minute because This is just something I think people have been asking for last 10 years and has not been done, and something we should have done. Vacation days, laptops, other equipments required to work. One thing that Caltech does that I very appreciate is writing support. English not as first language is a big problem to a lot of academics. All of our documents are written in English, and specifically, it's such a big taboo. Everyone says, right? Like, you can't have grammatical error in your CV or research statement, and that's true. Like, every time I see a grammatical error, I flinch, but I make those grammatical errors because English is not my first language. So writing support provided by library provides workshop on coding and how to make seminar. I think I'm going to stop here for a moment.
Yeah, thanks so much for listing all of those resources. Maybe for some of the people in our audience, it might be helpful to talk about how graduate students are considered a little bit differently from other people of the same age group that are in different careers. So does anybody have any thoughts on, how we think about grad students, maybe how we should think about them a little bit differently?
So I was actually going to say something to that point. I think in academia, we often don't have very clear hiring practices. So as a graduate student, I received the message a lot that I should be working 60-hour weeks or more. And just in general as a grad student, but especially if I wanted to follow the academic career path. And that's just, it's not healthy for anyone. Maybe there's some weeks where that happens, but that really shouldn't be the case every week. But I think just having clearer guidelines on what universities actually look for when hiring for academic positions. And that can be started at your own institution, no matter where you are going to grad school. If there was more transparency in hiring practices and grad students were shown what the hiring committees are doing to hire, what they're looking for, how they're making their decisions, that could help. And then the other thing I was going to say is more mentoring and support for the application process. So it's kind of expected that you're supposed to spend hours on an application for an academic position or a postdoc position. And is that supposed to be part of those 60 hours? Where is the time for that? And where is the mentoring and support for that? So like setting aside money for you to be able to spend time on applications and giving you dedicated mentors who are supposed to help you through that process are the resources I would say we need.
So I'm going to chime in here, and I think pretty much everybody on this panel has probably heard the question when they were in grad school, when are you going to get a real job? And I think that really highlights the difference between being in grad school versus your peers that might, have real jobs not in academia. And I think part of the reason we have all these issues that have been outlined by the other panelists is because we aren't treated, or not we, but grad students aren't treated like they have a real job. And that is internally and externally. And so because it's not a real job with boundaries, people push the boundaries for what they expect out of grad students. And because of the hierarchy of power, it is incredibly difficult for grad students to set those boundaries. And so fundamentally, part of the problem is that grad school isn't considered a job. It's considered this lucky thing that you have in order to make the next step. But, it is a job. You are being paid to do a job, and you are allowed to set those boundaries.
Hi, this is Patty. Can you hear me? Okay, great. I just wanted to add to that I really think the most thought-provoking aspect of this, the vignette story, is how it's really pointing to some of the systemic issues in STEM and in astrophysics, and in particularly that there are unwritten rules, and that some people are already inside the bubble where those rules are well known. Either they come from a family where there's been a long academic tradition, or they just know people on the inside that are able to give them the rules, versus those who are on the outside. And there are just so many boundaries, the inside-outside boundary in STEM in particular. I think this vignette really captures them, having to try to figure out the rules by watching, being afraid to ask for what you need, and particularly in the grad school, level of the career. And the message that comes out a lot, that we don't pursue science because it is a career path so much as we pursue it because it is a passion, and that it will be this gift that we get at the end if we're lucky enough to figure out the rules, to win the prize at the end. I think that is a huge difference, particularly in the grad school years, between what your peers that you maybe went to high school with and or went to college with are experiencing in their early 20s and early 30s, versus what you're expected to experience and how you're expected to consider your labor. So I think those are like very much messages or almost values that are baked into the community, that people are treating it as something that is a gift, that it's a passion, that it's going to be, pursued because your heart and soul is in it. You will be so ready to work 60, 80 hours a week to pursue this. You'll get very lucky at the end if you get a job. And that's kind of, it's a paradigm shift that has to happen at every level. Those messages just keep propagating otherwise if we don't really take a hard look at where those messages come from and what we're telling ourselves about our careers, and what we are either on purpose or intrinsically or implicitly giving those messages to those around us and those who are our mentees.
Can I add to that?
Oh,
Oh,
sorry. I'll go and then I'll let you go. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Right. Just to echo what Patty was saying, I think this is really amplified with historically excluded groups. The notion of I just felt very lucky to be there, that is because the system is built to make you feel like they let you in and they're doing you this huge favor for having you there, and you need to figure it out because we open the door for you. And so this is the idea of inclusion versus actually giving someone a seat at the table and making sure they can eat too, right? Putting someone at the table and not serving them dinner is awful. And that's what's happening in this story. She is sitting at this game table, but she is not being given the opportunity to participate at the best of her abilities. And so, what Patty says is very true for everybody, but for historically excluded students, I think that is amplified by 1,000-fold.
Yeah, thank you both for commenting on that. I was just going to say the rules might even be different for different people. It's not only this set of rules that some people know and some don't know, but those who don't know, often the rules are different for them and they need to go beyond what is expected of their peers to get to the same point. And so that we need to first level the playing field by explicitly stating those rules and making them fair for everyone. And I also appreciated Patty's point about being able to ask about the rules, but while I think we should be able to comfortably ask questions, we need to explicitly state these rules so people don't have to ask them. We shouldn't have to put that burden on the grad students for figuring everything out on their own. And also I wanted to comment on the passion for their job thing, because that is one thing that I think we can use to recruit more people into physics, even at the undergraduate level, instead of selling it as you should do physics because physics is because you love it, because you have a passion for it. That should not be the only reason, right? Physics impacts society. Physics, you can build technologies with it, whether you go into the academic or industry career path. And so we really need to start reshaping how we think of physics. And it's not just, you don't just do it purely because you want to, because in the world we live in, most people need a salary. Most people want to have a reason for doing their job, something that fulfills them. And we can't just have it be this altruistic, elite way of thinking about, oh, you just do it because you love it, because that's not realistic for most people.
So this is an awesome conversation, and I just want to jump in and ask if there have been any questions from the audience or if anyone would like to raise their hand to share any thoughts. And while we're all thinking, I have a question for the panelists that sort of spins off of some of this. So as we're thinking about hidden curriculum, what is the best way to communicate hidden curriculum to the people who most need to see it? You know, should this be part of the orientation process for new grad students, that you just have a packet of information that you hand out and hope everybody reads it? Does this need to be an explicit part of maybe a mentor that's different from the research mentor that needs to bring this to people's attention sort of as they're going through the steps where they need it?
I can speak to this a bit. I agree with all of the wonderful points that the panelists raised. I think of this hidden curriculums slash expectations at 3 levels. One is literally the expectations in the course, and like the places you need to clear to succeed in your graduate career, and that can be part of the orientation itself. And I think those expectations are probably clearer when people are taking courses, and become less and less clear as you keep on moving ahead in academic path. And I think only some of them honestly can be written down as rules, because a lot of them are not rules, they are ethics or nice to have or good to have things. As Paddy was saying, something who has been part of academic culture or American culture in this particular respect knows, but others don't. I think mentorship, both peer mentorship and a mentor who's not your PI, are very, very important. And I think I have had so many questions about should I do this or not do this? Do appearing in all of the DEI panels add to my career or remove my career? And honestly, I've needed mentors to ask that, because at some point, people were introducing me as a DEI person instead of the physics I do in my collaborations I was in. So these are unwritten rules that we do not know. And I think that's where mentorship helps. And third, I will always come back to this, are the structural changes. And sometimes a written rule could be very clear, for instance, that we need to score so much in GRE to be a part of a grad school program. But that is a very clear written rule, but that is inherently biased, and that needs a structural change. We need to remove GRE expectations from a grad school, because time after time research has shown how that is biased again. So I think unwritten rules and structural changes will always go hand in hand.
And if I could insert my opinion about the removal of GRE requirements, I think for departments that decide to not consider the GRE, it's important to remove it completely from consideration, and not to have some people submit it and other people not, based on how confident they are. Because we know from diversity studies, especially studies about gender, that there's no real correlation between performance and confidence, but there is a very strong correlation between confidence and gender, or confidence and minority status. So to make sure that you're not considering only scores from people who have confidence. I do want to ask again if there are any questions in the audience, or Amber, if there's been anything on this topic submitted through the form.
Yeah, we have a couple actually. The first one is more of a comment. We were talking about affordable housing for graduate students, and someone made a note that many subsidized grad student housing does not allow partners. And I feel that's something very interesting, and is really kind of taking the grad student away from, their personal life and their life as, you know, not a physics student, but as a whole person. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
I'll chime in here, and maybe it's a little bit of a tangent, but one of the things that I have noticed in my experiences is that one of the reasons people tend to leave programs is because of the pay level. And this ties into the ability to pay for housing, right? If we were paying grad students affordable wages, then they would be able to get the accommodations that they needed instead of having to rely on a university to set things up for them or a department to set things up for them. So I think really a lot of this boils down to the fact that, you know, you're lucky to be in a grad school, so you should take these crap wages that we offer you because you're lucky to be here and you're passionate about physics. So that should carry you through, regardless of what your family status is, regardless of what your cultural status is, regardless of all of that. If you are truly determined, you will figure out how to make this work. But, you know, if we want that of people, we have to pay them at that level. And we don't pay grad students enough. And that is why they leave. And that is why, you know, historically underserved and excluded groups leave. And so I think all of this boils down to, you know, why do we pay grad students as though it's not a real job?
So yeah, I think you wanted to mention something.
Yeah, I think the person who brought that up, it's very important. I do think people think of grad school, grad student and society as two Venn diagrams that don't necessarily intersect with each other. And as grad students and postdocs, we imbibe that feeling as well, as though we live in this bubble outside of a community. And so first thing is in my affordable housing for all, I do think universities should provide affordable housing, but we as tenants and residents of the city and community, we should be organizing for affordable housing for all. Affordable housing for all, because we are part of this society. It's something I feel very strongly about. And specifically connecting that question to what Farah was saying, it's the university administration, and I'm going to use this word, exploit that status of grad student. I was in a grad school which was unionized, and so we university students would use grad students as workers when they had to make their claim of certain things, and they would treat them as students when they had to make. So we used to say grad student exists in this Schrodinger cat's status of being a worker and a student at the same time. And this is not by chance. This is systemic. This is used to stack the field against them. And that connects that, oh, you are lucky, we are giving you housing, but we are not going to give you partner housing because you are a grad student suddenly. If you want, you can get your own house because you're a worker, but we won't pay you because you're a grad student. It's amazing to see that flip in a single sentence, how many times specifically a grad student can be a student and a worker at the same time. So I think both the grad students need to ask and demand for their rights, honestly, in this grad house, affordable housing, and family housing is definitely partner housing. But I have also lived in houses with where a grad student is trying to work with 2 kids in the same house, and there are a lot of issues with housing in academia.
Yeah, just adding, thank you both, those were excellent. I agree with everything you all just said. And just adding to that, yeah, forget partners. Like, what if a grad student wants to have a kid? How do you deal with, you know, parental leave? How do you deal with accommodations? It's just, it's not there. It's not there, and it needs to be.
I could just add one comment to all this. I do think that there's, again, this, you know, the fact that we have a very hierarchical structure in STEM and the people that are making decisions about what's going to happen for graduate students and what's acceptable, what sacrifices are expected, those are people that feel that they value the fact that they made those sacrifices, right? So like it's almost like an unwritten rule that they don't even see. They just have that's how they succeeded. They see that that was a success that made them stronger. Whether or not that's even true, they've embodied that as a value. And so that's a lot to fight against in the system. But I think what's important if I were to talk to my graduate student self, go back in time and talk to my graduate student self, is that there are messages out there that are telling you that you're failing if you spend more time thinking about your family than your work, or that you're failing if you want to start a family and you're still in graduate school. But you really need to flip that and allow yourself to believe that the system is failing you. And that is perhaps a stronger message that you could try to advocate upward. But again, I totally want to completely 100% agree with the other panelists who said that this should not be on the graduate students to solve. So if the system is failing you, please be aware of that. It is not your failure. The system is failing you.
Yeah, I think,
go ahead.
I think Patty's point is super important in all of the things that we talk about, having mentors that look like you or have been through things that are more senior. We have to keep in the back of our minds that there's survivorship bias playing into all of these. The people who survived, who've made it through, have internalized a lot of the misogyny, the racism, the sexism that goes along with surviving. And whether or not they can recognize that, and I say this even applying to myself, whether or not you can recognize that survivorship bias is dependent on the person, and it's difficult to do, right? It takes a lot of self-reflection. And so, even those mentors who look like you, who come from cultures like yours, have internalized a lot of the stuff that's damaging. And so I think it's something really important to point out in all of this.
If I have suffered, then you should also have to suffer. This is why we all still have to study Jackson and electrodynamics, right?
Exactly.
I'm loving the direction of this conversation, but we have overstayed our time on this topic. So I'm going to cut it a little bit short and move on to our next slide. So we're looking now at assessment criteria. So Mark is advising 2 postdocs. Abigail has a promising CV and knows her dissertation project really well, but has not picked up on the new material in her current project after 6 months. Mark is encouraging to her during meetings because he wants her to feel supported, but privately, he's disappointed in her performance and planning not to invite her back for a second year. Ralph looks almost identical on paper, except that he's also been involved in a lot of community-wide initiatives. Ralph struggled for about a month to get up to speed, asking lots and lots of questions and frequently going to Mark for feedback. Currently, he's doing very well, and Mark is recommending him for a permanent position. So when we're thinking about assessment criteria, how are different assessment criteria weighted, maybe for graduate students, maybe for postdocs, maybe for early career faculty? How does this communicate the values of our culture? How are expectations communicated, or are they? Does transparency in the assessment process for career and tenure assessments affect outcomes? And what can advisors, institutions, and funding agencies do to drive positive change through assessment criteria and processes? So we've touched on some of these topics already, and I want to go ahead and pass it off to the panelists.
Patty, would you like to go ahead and start off?
Oh, sure. So I'm looking at the question and thinking that these are, definitely 3 different levels: advisors, institutions, and funding agencies. And I worry that in practice, we often see a lot of finger pointing of those 3 pieces of this ecosystem. Funding agencies, point to the fact that they make their decisions based on peer review, and advisors get funded based on what funding agencies fund to, and what can they pay their students based on what proposals they win. I think we're starting to see a little bit of movement here, which is good. I think we should consider these to be pilot steps. So for example, NASA has the theory call out now, astrophysics theory, and they are requiring an inclusion plan to be part of those proposals. So that's good that they're adding it. Where it could perhaps be a little bit better would be if they had some guidance for what a good inclusion plan looks like. What are we looking for? What are we going to evaluate? A good inclusion plan based on who's going to evaluate the inclusion plan. Is it going to be astrophysicists or experts in inclusion? And also, will it matter, right? So if you put in a very strong proposal, but your inclusion plan was from a website, does it matter? So I think the answer is these are good steps to start taking. I think it is definitely a demonstration that the funding agency itself, that NASA itself, has recognized that they do have a role here, and that they do have some structures in place, some existing structures in place where they can influence the funding and how that's going to flow. And so I'm going to applaud the agency, even though I'm representing the agency, but not that part of the agency, for thinking about this intentionally. How can we use the fact that funds are flowing to individuals, institutions, and advisors to set some expectations for how we want to support our community. I think that the jury is still out on whether that will be effective, but I am glad that we're starting the experiment at least. And then I also see that there's a tension between, we fund institutions, advisors put proposals in through the institutions, and sort of, probably the tension that's been around for too long now, in that institutions want that funding to come in. So at a certain level, they are going to protect their advisors, right? The ones who are winning grants. And so how do we try to pilot another program, perhaps, where we can truly reward institutions for uncovering the good advisors and the bad advisors, and actually taking a role in rewarding good advising and helping perhaps not the best advisors become better? Because I think there's also got to be a sort of an institutional growth mindset here. How do we acknowledge the fact that individual advisors are not trained in how to be good mentors, are not trained in what it means to, be more inclusive, to open up those doors to people that maybe are always on the outside or are many layers on the outside? How do we bake in the expectations that we will grow as good mentors, good advisors, good inclusive partners? And that's just as important as being strong scientists. So I think it's a complicated issue. I'm really glad to see that it's sort of stratified that way, advisors, institutions, and funding agencies. And I'm just very hopeful that we're going to move away from that sort of unproductive finger pointing exercise that, people are saying it's not my fault, it's your fault, or it's not my responsibility, it's the advisor's responsibility, and getting more into like a collaborative, recognizing that each of these do have a role, and how to move forward effectively to improve inclusivity for the climate, and to involve experts in those areas that are not necessarily people who hold PhDs in astrophysics. I'm sorry I rambled.
No, thank you so much for those thoughts. Did any of the other panelists have any thoughts they want to share?
I have a few that I wanted to share. I could talk about this forever. This is like my life right now. I think fundamentally, in order for there to be any kind of structural change, there needs to be incentivization from the top, because no department or person is going to change unless they get something out of it. I know that sounds super jaded, but that's the fact that I have come to terms with, and kind of a big mindset change that had to happen for me when I became faculty. And so, you can, till the cows come home, say use rubrics, you know, get rid of the GRE, don't selectively use the GRE, you know, anonymize applications, dual blind review. You can say all those things, but unless a department or, you know, someone is going to get something out of it, they will not use those things correctly. They will use them only in name. They will ignore you. Right. I've been getting a lot of ignoring on my end when I say these things. And so, yeah, I mean, I know it sounds super jaded, but unless there's some sort of incentive, we can scream all about how these changes need to happen. And I think people are hearing these things, but it's very slow to move because moving from the status quo is difficult, and you're only going to do it if you get something out of it at the end. And so that ties in to a lot of what Patty was saying. How do we reward the PIs that do this? How do we retrain the PIs that don't do this? And I think a lot of it, at least, you know, on the university side, I don't know too much about NASA, but can be done by having checks and balances from the admin on each step of a process for hiring at the faculty level and accountability, and then some sort of bonus that they give people who are doing it right. And so, you know, I know I come off as very jaded, but, you know, in order for an institution to change, you have to give them that carrot that makes them want to change.
Yeah, beyond the carrot, how about some accountability? So what is happening to this Mark person who's treating two people very differently and not communicating expectations, not communicating the assessment criteria that he's judging these two postdocs with, right? Where is that? Where is his Mark's mentor training? Where is the top people from the top telling Mark, this is what you should be doing? And where are the people saying, wait, you're not doing this, and here's how we're going to hold you accountable?
Can I add another jaded opinion following from what Medhat said? Yeah, the two words I have in my notes for this section are transparency and accountability. As Paddy and Farah mentioned, of all the good steps that are happening, yes, all faculty positions now require a diversity statement. They have always required a teaching statement. But seeing still from the below, I do not see that being reflected in the actual hire. So when I go on this academic job market, I am getting the message, yes, those things are nice to have, but your research, your papers, and that's all that matters. Honestly, that is the message that I have as I am going. If it is not true, I don't see it. There is no transparency. And adding to accountability, again, as I think very good point raised based on the story, what's happening to Mark. And similarly, for all the universities that are requiring diversity statement, they still have sexual harassers on their faculty. Like, how does one take that seriously? Like, forget about small accountabilities, really, really big misconducts are not held accountable. So this is a mixed message, and a mixed message not, I think, of the intended kind. Like, yes, we will give in by asking for these statements, but we will keep these sexual harassers, people who are racist, misogynist on our faculty. And that is a disappointment looking from below, still going into the job market.
That is a really problematic message to be sending to new applicants. You know, we are looking to hire potentially you, but also we'd like to keep these other people around who have some questionable ethics. I wanted to call on Udai, who's had his hand up for a while.
Oh, hi, thanks. Yeah, so thanks for the discussion. It's very enlightening. And I have a quick question regarding, so also related to assessment criteria, but for different kind of field, there's kind of different thing that should be more valued. For example, like independence. For example, if you work on, like, I'm a theorist, and as theorist, it's actually very important to be independent, and also to be able to say that maybe my advisor is wrong, or my in terms of scientific point. But under the current system, we all need these strong letter or things to get promoted and need a very strong advisor. And it's very hard to operate independently, or if you have a different scientific point to voice that, because we're afraid that we'll get the worse letter. So I'm just wondering if there is any mechanism that we can implement to incentivize independence for the younger researchers. Yeah, thanks.
If I could add to that also, I mean, beyond just letters from the advisor, theorists often struggle with progressing in the career because they're evaluated by people who are not theorists, who then don't understand the subfield very well. And it's often not clear to experimentalists and observers what the criterion for theorists should be, because, you know, the knee-jerk reaction is, well, everyone should be held to the same standard. But that's not always completely true. So does anybody have any thoughts on that kind of a topic?
Farah, would you like to start us off with this one?
Yes. I guess I'm still trying to collect some thoughts. You know, back to what you, Dai, was saying, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's been shocking, actually, having now sitting on the other side of the table when reading letters of recommendation, you know, reading applications, what people think that they can write in letters. It's absolutely shocking. I've read the studies saying, you know, letters for men and women are different, you know, values are placed for women on soft skills, whereas, you know, letter writers write about men in terms of, you know, their accomplishments. But I mean, beyond that, the level of racist comments that make it into letters, the level of sexism that makes it into, like blatant sexism that makes it into letters, is actually super, super appalling. And so, you know, one of the things that I think needs to be considered is, you know, maybe at step 0, letters aren't the best thing for us to be soliciting, right? Maybe at step 0, we need to take those out of the pool, and maybe, you know, at the very end, we ask for them to make sure there are no red flags, because I think letters can be incredibly dangerous. It places an inordinate amount of power on someone higher up in the hierarchy, and that is dangerous in the wrong hands. It is dangerous in the hands of someone who just doesn't know better, right? You could just not know that your implicit bias is showing, right? Or your explicit bias is showing. And letters are so secretive, right?
Yeah.
No one except the committee reads them. You never know what's in them. And so you're working super hard to try to get this letter that is incredibly, incredibly important, and you don't know what someone can put in there, right? There's no rules for what can go into a letter. And so, you know, I think that's why, you know, it's very difficult to speak up against an advisor, because the rest of your career is so dependent on that one document. And, you know, that just reinforces the hierarchy in a way that's excessively damaging to students, right? I mean, I don't know if all of you are aware, right, of what just happened at the University of Florida. A grad student, an Indian grad student, came out. You know, he's a fantastic grad student. He got a prestigious Hubble Fellowship, but he was abused by his advisor, and he had to take it quietly, right? Because he was on visa, he was being paid by a grant, and he didn't know what would happen to him if he spoke out against the abuse. And so the reason I bring that up, right, is because, you know, there's this fear of standing up for yourself against the next level of power, because the rest of your career is hinged on what they think of you and what they say to the community about you. And I just find that incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, can I just follow up, saying directly follow up what you say? So I would really hope that we can continue this conversation through email. And just a comment that this is recorded. There are some universities are very prestigious, and they keep hiring their students like 1, 2, 3, 4 generation, especially for theories. I think in the theory community, we all know which school that is, so I'm not gonna say the name, but they keep doing that, and it's a very exclusive, and also it's bad for the science community because nobody wants to work on not the hot topic by their advisor. And if you work on other things, nobody would give you a chance to give a talk. Nobody would invite you and things like that. And their way, like the older generation, they don't even care about letter. They just call their friends saying that, hey, why don't you hire my student? And even now it's still the same because I know they are talking about this all the time. Let's just call. So I really would like to follow this up, and also I would actually try to involve the theory community, theory fund here, incorporating these. Yeah, thanks a lot for the comments. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Yujai. With regard to like secrecy and letter writing, I have actually been in the position before of someone who did hire me told me not to use one of my previous letter writers again. They couldn't tell me why, but you know, you always wonder when something like that happens. I'm actually wondering if, Patty, maybe you've thought about some of these hiring practices, maybe specifically with regard to letters, because I know that you were involved in the hiring review recently.
Yep. And I've also been on many hiring panels over the last, couple decades and have run some. So yeah, I've thought about it a lot from a lot of different directions. Again, writing a letter of recommendation is something that no one trains an advisor to do. You just kind of think you got the knack of it because you got the feel of it, which is of course not true at all. And thank you for referencing the studies about, gender bias and other biases in letters of recommendation. That's very quantifiable data. I'm not sure that all letter writers have read those studies, and I'm going to go ahead and guess that probably less than half have. And it shows. So I've seen both sides. I have seen letters from who are considered to be, like quite prestigious leaders in the field. And sometimes those letters are more about that person than they are about the person that's up for the job, which is not great. But sometimes those letters really do contain, quite damaging statements about the early career person that they are completely unaware of, obviously. So I've done the same thing. I've gone, kind of outside of the system and let that person know that while that's a great person on paper, probably don't want that person writing you a letter again. And, I don't know how to fix that other than, trying to have your, the people who apply for your job, if they made your short list, they're all awesome. They'd all be a dynamite fit to your group. It's not really that you're going to be rank ordering people on some sort of truly quantifiable scale. They're all fantastic. They'd all be great there. And if you're seeing something in their package that is actually probably holding them back, it's your responsibility as a community member to let them know about it. As far as if you're in a career, if you're going for your next job and you're thinking about who your letter writers are going to be, I would say think outside of your lane. Other people, and they're not necessarily the ones who are most familiar with, say, your research or what you did on that project or that paper, but they may also be able to write you an extremely strong letter because they know you and they know your strengths as a researcher, and as a community member and as a team member. And even if that person is not as well known, say, in the whole field, their letter may be the letter that matters. I wanted to say something about the Florida incident. And I'm struck by the fact that that person was empowered to speak only after they had a fellowship that was directed right at them, right? So they controlled their funding now. They're not beholden to somebody above them that decides whether they're in or out. And I think that's an area where we can really look at changing that. So sort of like, the GRE issue sort of being changed at the onesies and twosies level for years and years. And now you're starting to see it kind of like the house of cards or the dominoes are falling and everybody's like, this is a dumb thing. We don't need this. I think we need to do the same thing with who's allowed to write budget proposals. And we see it from two sides. Different institutions have different rules. This goes for graduate students and postdocs. Are you at an institution where you can write the science proposal, but your advisor has to put the budget in? Why? And so maybe if we're in a position in those institutions where we can ask those questions instead of the students, we should be asking those questions. And the same thing from the funding agency side. Why for certain fellowships, does the money go to the advisor and not the student? If the student wrote the proposal, why don't we look at the rules there and see if it's possible to direct the funds right to the student? I think many times when things are working well, it doesn't matter. But if you've got a dysfunctional relationship between an advisor and a student for whatever reason, the fact that the advisor handles the funding means it's 100 times worse than it needs to be. If we could just get the funding directly to the people that are doing the work and writing the proposals, I think we would remove at least one barrier to continuing in the field.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I just added a link in the chat. The National Academies came out with this report in 2018 on sexual harassment in STEM. And one of their recommendations is to take the funds that are coming in through the advisors and different proposals and putting them in one pot and then distributing them to the graduate students instead of having them go through the advisor and to the student, just to give this, just to remove that structure of power, as you said.
Awesome. Thanks for those comments. I wanted to ask if we have any questions from the audience, maybe one from Amber.
Yeah, we have a question submitted that would fit perfectly right here. We've been talking about recommendation letters and how contingent upon an advisor someone is, or very contingent on getting those recommendation letters themselves. We have a question about supporting independent researchers. Our current system strongly depends on the recommendation letter. Young people who work on excellent independent works many times would not be supported or rewarded. Could we develop a mechanism to counter this? Zoya, would you like to start off?
I think this is a question that I myself have. So I think what Patty said in her last statements is the best way I can think of, or the link of Midhat posted, because I think a pool of PIs in the current system, that is my mechanism of at least trying to make sure that it's not just a one-on-one relationship with the PI. It is bad for the power structure. It is bad for the science development. You learn so much from a wide variety. So I think having a wide range of mentors is something that I try to do now, and I would recommend it to anyone who has access to that. But I do think how the money flows is an important aspect to this. And I think Paddy's comment about funding being directly given to students and grad students would be my answer here.
I think it's very interesting, right? In the tenure and promotion process, in particular at R1 and R2 institutions, it is like hammered into your head that your one job before your 5 or 6 years is up is to get big grants, right? And so because a new faculty or a young faculty is told that, they're driven in that direction because that's how the university values that new faculty and what overhead and stuff that they can bring to the university, what prestige can they bring to the university. That's what's valued above all things in your tenure packet. And because you are so driven to get that money and keep that money and make sure that you are accomplishing what you were funded to do, you often forget, right, that that money trickles downwards, what you're using to pay your grad students. You also have to realize that they are human, that they have other interests, they have other career development things that they might want to do, but you're pushed so hard from the top, right? Of, you know, your value is the dollar sign that you've brought to this department, that you've brought to this college, that you've brought to this university. And so that having that be such a powerful pillar in the assessment for tenure, I think is incredibly dangerous, because that just punches downwards. It has a ripple effect all the way down through the grad students, even the undergrads. And so, yeah, it ties into the fact that, you know, tenure assessment is also incredibly biased. It's incredibly opaque. Let me tell you, it is incredibly opaque. You know, what you're told versus what happens behind closed doors are sometimes very different. And so, again, this brings us back to making sure that the expectations are communicated and the expectations are written such that they're equitable and that it doesn't, you know, ripple effect downwards negatively, right? Because you're negatively affecting that PI, you're negatively affecting all their students. And as such, you're negatively affecting your whole department by, you know, pushing that pillar so incredibly hard.
So thanks for all of those comments on assessment criteria. I'm going to take this opportunity to go ahead and move us along to the next topic. So this is advocacy, and specifically advocating for yourself as an early career person. So I actually borrowed this quote from the accounts you can see linked there. My life has been so much better ever since I traded my imposter syndrome for brilliant conman syndrome. Do I deserve anything in life? No. Will I grasp it anyway? Yes. My art has never been worth anything, but watch me fake my way into art school. And it goes on and on like this. I'm brilliant and drunk with power. So what types of vulnerabilities might early career people experience? How do these change with different types of funding sources, different nationalities, and different identities? And what systems and resources, protections, and rights do early career researchers have that they might not realize that they have? How can we negotiate when we're starting a new position? How can early career researchers better advocate for themselves when they're in a vulnerable position? And I wanted to pass this off specifically to Midhat to start.
Yeah, it's a loaded question. I want to start with, though, by saying something that I've recently heard is reframing the imposter syndrome as imposter phenomenon, and just taking the focus off of the person who's experiencing it. It's not you that has a problem. It's not you that has a syndrome, but it's the culture. It's a phenomenon that exists and it's happening to you because of the culture that we have established in academia. So first I wanted to start with that. Okay, so what types of vulnerabilities do we experience as early career researchers? There's so much to talk about. So yeah, definitely going back to the funding sources, being able to have external funding can give you a lot of leverage. I was on a fellowship in my first 2 years of grad school that was independent from my advisor, and that was really helpful in being able to choose which lab I wanted to work in, being able to leave that lab and decide if I wanted to go into another lab and take that time. So definitely having, depending on a funding source, is a vulnerability. Different identities definitely come into play. Sorry, I'm all over the place right now because there's just so much here, but advocating for yourself is extremely important. And I think unfortunately, it's extremely important because others often don't do it for you and the burden's on you to do it. So I don't agree with the fact that you have to do it, but I will say you have to do it. And the main thing I want to say here is that you are worth it. And you should not be questioning whether or not you belong where you are. And you should be advocating for yourself, because just know that others who are succeeding are doing it. And so it is something that you need to be doing. It is something that you should do without shame and without any hesitance. I'll stop there and maybe I'll come back with more thoughts.
I think imposter syndrome is like the biggest dupe that has been pulled over our eyes to shift the blame away from the institution to the person, right? You're not in grad school because you don't deserve to be there, right? It's the institution that is beating you down, making you question yourself. Institutions are full of gaslighting, whether you are a faculty member, whether you are a postdoc, whether you're a grad student, whether you're an undergrad. And the best method I feel like they've used to gaslight us is by convincing us that it's our own problem that we feel that way. And if we think it's our own problem, then we won't move to fix things. And that ties into standing up for yourself, right? If you realize that this is all some grand dupe where the wool's being pulled over your eyes, you're being made to feel that way, you're being gaslit, then maybe that could empower you to push those boundaries a little bit. And, you know, imposter syndrome is one of those things that absolutely drives me crazy. Just absolutely drives me crazy, because I think it's a huge shenanigan that people use to shift blame off of themselves and put it on you, and it just beats you down even further. And so, you know, when you have those feelings, I think it's really important and empowering to ask yourselves, is it the institution that I'm in? Is it the structure that I'm in that's making me feel this way? Or is this something truly that is coming from inside myself? And surprisingly, when you take a step back and ask yourself that question, a lot of the time, it's not you, it's them.
I also, sorry, if I could just add one more thing on that. Something that really helped me, in grad school, there were a few months where I thought about dropping out. I was just not fitting into this lab. The expectations were not, I was not meeting the expectations they had of being in the lab all the time, and et cetera, et cetera. But something that really helped me, I used to think I was just accepted because of, you know, the whole imposter syndrome thing where you think it's a mistake. And my friend said to me, they would not have admitted you if they didn't think you can't succeed. And that really just helped just reframed everything for me, because I used to even think, and I'm so sorry if I'm triggering anyone here, but I used to think I got in because I qualify as a minority student and that they just wanted to increase their numbers. But when someone said, no, they are letting you in because they want you to succeed, they want you here, whether or not that's true, that really helped me reframe my mind and think, okay, they want me to succeed here. They want me here. That's why I'm here. It's not just because I'm helping them with their numbers.
So I
If
think
I
oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Thanks. I'm so glad Vedat and Farah spoke before me, and just like imposter syndrome is gaslighting is a sentence I totally am on board with. First, to just make myself clear, I have advocated for myself. I had to advocate for myself. My grad school applications, I was told I shouldn't apply. I wasn't ready. I did. I got in. Specifically, my current postdoc, I was told I shouldn't apply. I won't get it and I will feel bad. I advocated for myself and I got in. So it has to be done, but it drains me. It is not something that comes naturally. I have to muster all of my energy to do it, and I feel more tired and shittier after doing it. So it is another burden that we put on our students. And I think some of it has to do maybe with the cultural background as well. This is not something in the culture that I grew up in. Speaking about yourself was looked down upon. But I think in general, that this advocating for yourself is just putting people against each other, making them fight against each other and take even more resources from people who are drained of resources. And here, I really believe in this line by a comic. I don't like the comic too much, but this particular line, I don't want to lean in, I want to lie down. That's my motto of life. I don't want to lean in, don't ask me to. And same for like breaking the glass ceiling, I don't believe in that. Like that just takes energy. It hurts me. I want to dismantle the stupid glass house. And the way I have found any energy to do this thing is I contrast this advocating for yourself with collective action. Being there with your peers, being along with them, having solidarity, that's what gives me energy. That's what energizes me. As Midhat said, like a friend telling you something, that's what I have been told by my peers I can do it, and that's what gives me the confidence. And I hope I am there for my other friends who need that confidence, and that's the only way to get through this. But specifically, again, bringing up the AIP Team Up full report, they have these 2 sections on belonging and physics identity as being crucial, and that's what fights the imposter syndrome. And they literally had these things about, if the professor knows your name in a class, you do better, you do not feel unseen. So similar thing, basically you recognize and encourage your peers, your mentors, your mentees. Specific thing, calling for presentation as conference, being acknowledged as an expert. I think we should be generous towards our peers, but I think the people in power have the duty to encourage and mentor, invite to panels on all sorts of topics. And I think that really is the antidote to this scam of imposter syndrome.
So I think some of the best advice that I've received with regard to imposter syndrome is to pretend that you are your own best friend. You know, sometimes it's really difficult to do something for yourself, but it's really easy to do it for your best friend. So if you would do it for your best friend, you should do it for yourself also. And Patty, I wanted to ask you specifically, since you get to see a lot of different applications at different stages of people's careers, what type of self-advocacy do you want to see from people who are applying to positions? Because I would imagine that what you don't want to see is a million emails about their application status.
Well, I think asking for information is fine. And so let me answer 2 parts. Let me answer your specific question first, and that is like the you know, where and how to self-advocate on perhaps like the job path. Every job that I'm looking at applicants for, there are hundreds of applicants. That goes from like undergraduate internships in the summer through postdoctoral applications to permanent positions. So that's a lot of things. That's a lot of, you know, information on a spreadsheet to get through. I would love to know who among those hundreds of people really want this job, and they really think that they're a good fit for it because of whatever. So having the ability to see that they've thought about the specific job, and it's not just something that, you know, they're sending out 100 applications and this is just one of 100. That can either be through like very targeted, you know, the application materials that come in writing are very targeted to the specific position, understand what the position is and why they're a good fit for it, but also an email to say that. Of those hundreds of applicants, maybe 1 or 2 will email somebody that they know is involved. And it doesn't have to be like somebody that's on the hiring committee, just be somebody in the institution. You know, I did apply for that job. I'm a really good fit because, you know, you've got this telescope there and I already use it. I'm a super user. I got an instrument. Like, it's just somebody in the system that knows that, oh, this person applied for a really good reason. I want to look at that harder. I want to give that a better look. That's never a bad thing. And that's never seen as pestering in my view. So do it, you know what you want, which jobs you want, and be, you know, do reach out to make sure that somebody in that organization knows that you want it and why you want it. But you know, going back to this story, the imposter versus the con man syndrome, I'm struck by, you know, it's definitely driven by the fact that we all feel that we are judged all the time, and that judgment is mattering, and we're judged against this model of the scientist. And, you know, some of us don't really match the model of the scientist. And so part of the imposter syndrome there is, you know, like, well, I'm going to be judged by things that aren't necessarily in my control. And then how do I make it look as if I'm like that person? And you can see so many layers of this, in particular, the way that women speak in science. That's just like the most obvious and maybe the largest example. There are so many other examples, but you know, women don't come into science necessarily speaking like all the other science people, but they do get messages early on that if they're going to be listened to, they need to speak in a certain way. And so I just think that's like a fascinating thing to see people changing, morphing the way that they speak so that they know that they're going to be judged differently than if they were to speak, say, in the native cadence that they would speak at the PTA meeting or something. So I think that, you know, that's a complicated issue there. That's definitely part imposter syndrome and part acknowledging that you want to be judged well. So I like this idea of acting as if you're that person. And I wouldn't necessarily call it the brilliant con man syndrome, but like acting as if you are, you know, in the science location that you want to be until you get there. You will get there. And I think it sucks that you have to act as if. I wish it wasn't like that. At the same time, I see it working for people and sometimes holding people back. So being aware that it is a real thing. And it does take energy, as Midhat said, I think. But then just finally bring it back around. Definitely advocate for yourself. And do it by knowing what your strengths are and what you want, and being comfortable with going for what you want, but also maybe asking yourself if the job you're applying for is maybe something that you don't want. If you have a gut feeling that it's maybe not a good fit, trusting your gut there too.
Yeah, can I add to that? So this is with my careers hat now. Whether it's an academic, I usually advise on industry career paths, but no matter what position you're applying for, you don't have to meet all of the criteria. It is well known, the research shows that women and people from underrepresented groups will try to meet 100% of the application criteria before applying. And white men tend to just look at, oh, I meet 50% of this, I'm gonna apply. Often when people are writing a job description, they're writing it for someone that might not even exist. They're just throwing it out there to see what they'll get. So you don't have to meet 100%, you don't, maybe not even 80% of the criteria to apply. Just the advice I like to give is look at what is required, think about what you already know how to do and whether you're interested in the rest. Like, would you want to do the rest, as Patty said? Are you interested in this position? And then I also just wanted to comment on the negotiating. If you do receive an offer, when you do receive an offer, often people focus on salary when negotiating, and that's definitely an important thing to negotiate. But there are also a lot of other aspects of a job. I think Zoya listed these earlier, right? So health insurance, are you getting all kinds of health insurance that you need? Are you getting family leave in case you want to have children, or if someone in your family is sick and you want to go take care of them? Are you getting family leave? How many vacation days are you getting? Can you negotiate to get more paid time off, right? How many telework days are you getting? Is telework part of the package? Do you want it to be part of the package? So look at all the things that are listed and think about what things you want. Go search different companies and see what they're offering. Retirement benefits, are they going to be matching or paying for part of your retirement funds? So that's my advice, is when you are negotiating, prepare all of your points and don't just focus on the salary.
I think the biggest negotiation mistake that I have ever made was not asking for relocation money when I had to move to Israel for my first postdoc. Yes, that face says it all. I did want to ask for questions from the audience. I know that Amber has one, but if anybody wants to raise their hand while we're reading that one out, please feel free.
Well, people are thinking, just to add on to what Midhat said, on the academic side, right? Public universities publish salaries, so know that. So you can actually go for public universities and know, what people are being paid in that department, or, you know, at that level in various departments. Also, you know, there's this concept of startup that comes with faculty positions. And sometimes, you know, you think, oh my God, they're giving me this like large amount of money as startup to fund me. But what sounds large might not actually be large in the context of what other people are getting offered. So asking your peers who have gotten recent faculty jobs what their startup budget was, and making sure you're asking what the restrictions are on that budget, because at some places it's a slush fund. At some places you can only spend, you know, a certain amount of it on equipment and you can't pay yourself on it, right? And so, you know, this is kind of the academic version of other things you need to look at when you're negotiating at the faculty position level.
Thanks for bringing that up. That's really important. Like negotiating in general is something that's so important for us to know about for throughout our careers, no matter where we are, and looking at specifics for in academia and out of academia. There's some really important distinctions. So thank you for adding that. I actually have my own question. So we talked about advocating for yourself, and it's clearly very difficult and takes so much energy. I personally have been someone who advocates for themselves a lot, and I do my best to advocate for others. But what do you do when you reach a wall and you know, the people who you're trying to advocate to are just not listening?
Can you be a little bit more specific about that? So are you talking about like if you have an offer and you're trying to negotiate for something in that offer, or are you talking about advocating for yourself in a different situation?
I'm talking about advocating for your like for yourself, like as a graduate student, like advocating for your boundaries, advocating for needing the right resources and whatnot. Like that's the type of advocacy that I'm thinking about.
I can speak briefly to it. I think one of these scenarios is where having a team of mentors helped. But I think if you need something from your PI and they are not listening, I think that again goes back to that very hierarchical one-on-one power structure. And that is a very difficult negotiation, especially if they are not listening and you hit a wall with them. Depending on how extreme it is, having a group of mentors helped me in some of the situations where I could talk to other mentors, and since they said that yes, you should go ahead with this, then being able to use that. But I can see that that is a very tricky wall to hit if it's your PI. Secondly, the thing that helped me was like once when I was negotiating with for salary as a grad student, then I talked to all of the grad students in my group and made sure we all were advocating for it. So having the power in number, and then going to figure out where again, this is the work then you have to do yourself, figuring out where the block is. Why does it not make sense? That meant going to the department chair. So basically going to the structural part of it rather than trying to convince a person.
Yeah, just you should advocate for yourself, but sometimes it's not possible for you to be the only one to do it, to get your PI to do it, get other mentors to do it, get other students to do it. And I would also say though, think about whether it is whose opinion it is you're trying to impact. I was part of a scientific collaboration and I used to really worry about everyone's opinions of me and whether sometimes I would ask my advisor to advocate for me to certain people who were higher up in this collaboration structure. And then I realized it didn't matter what they thought of me, because I did not want to apply to a job that was in their network. So yeah, spend your energy where it will have the most impact, and get other people advocating for you too.
So thank you so much for all of those thoughtful answers. I think we have time for just one more question if anybody wants to raise their hand. Or I can pass it over to Amber to take one of the questions from the form.
Yeah, we have a question from Bryce, and this is on a previous section. We just didn't have a chance to get to it. But Bryce asks, are there examples of agency research program funding models being driven by a more grad student postdoc focused structure instead of the PI focused? Farah, would you like to start?
Sure. And I had actually seen the question and started typing something out, and it got too long. In terms of grad students, I mean, there are independent grad student fellowships. They're competitive, right? There's the GRFP, there's the NASA Finest. If you're computational, there are, a couple of DOE computational ones that you can apply to. But that is a lot of work for a grad student. Often, there are time limits for which you can apply. And so I think what needs to happen structurally that will make those things more appealing for people to apply to is if PIs are rewarded for their students getting those things. Because then the PI will invest the time in making sure that their students are applying and that their students are writing competitive proposals and giving them the training that they need. As of right now, it's like, oh, well, my student happened to get one of these, great. But if that money counts for the student, but it also counts for the PI, then the PI is going to work with students more aggressively to get that independent source of funding and work with the student on their ideas to make that idea more marketable and successful. And that gives the grad student some sort of autonomy over what they're doing and where their money is coming from. At the postdoc level, right, there are independent postdoctoral fellowships that exist where it's your science idea and you are just going to an institution that someone can, where your mentor is there to be your collaborator, to help you on the professional development side, but you are the PI of that particular fellowship. So, the NSF fellowship at NASA, there's the NASA postdoctoral fellowships, the NPPs, I think. And so, and a lot of universities themselves have particular named fellowships that are independent research and not tied to a particular person or a particular grant. And so those are competitive yet channels where you can get some sort of autonomy outside of being tied to, a particular funding line. And that's kind of what I could think of. I mean, unfortunately, it really is, this structure that's been set up where, PIs get money for certain ideas and then hire students to do it. And it's not necessarily the most healthy structure.
I think it would be great if there were more things like the NASA postdoctoral program and the graduate research fellowships and the Finest fellowships, because they go to the proposal that a student or a postdoc wrote, and the advisor doesn't have the power to, is steered away from it. The grant is for that proposal. So that also gives a lot of autonomy to the research as well. I just wanted to point out there is another NASA fellowship called I think it's called the NASA Graduate Fellowship that's run out of the Office of Education at NASA. So NASA Finest is run out of the science divisions, but there's another graduate fellowship run out of the Office of Education that also requires a proposal from the student. I think currently the funds are directed either exclusively or mostly to minority serving institutions. But it's a very similar model. You know, proposal comes in, it goes to the student, it covers several years of their graduate work. And so it is not like predetermined by the PI. So I would say be aware of those opportunities for students and postdocs. And I love the idea of peer mentoring. It works at so many peer advocacy, you know, coming together to advocate as a group. And this could be an area where putting, you know, more voices on the same message could result in, you know, you have the same total amount of funding going to postdocs, but you direct more of it towards the postdocs themselves and less of it to the PI grants. Of course, that's complicated. There are many strings to be pulled and threads to be pulled apart, but it is an option in my mind. At least it seems like it could be in theory.
Awesome. I want to thank all of our panelists, Midhat, Zoya, Farah, Patty, for your time and your thoughtful responses today. For those of you still in the audience, we will try to answer your questions and we will post a sheet of the answers in the SEC DEI Slack channel. So thank you also to Amber for hosting and for keeping track of all of the questions. And I hope to see you guys around Snowmass.
Thank you, Tiffany and Amber. My pleasure talking to everybody.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you all so
everybody.
much.
Thank you.